the covenant with Israel through Moses. But I'm going to just take you briefly back into Eden, because take notice of what's going on in Eden, and then see how different elements come up again as we go through the covenants. First of all, in Eden, there was the presence of God. Wherever the presence of God is, there are cherubim. We see that in other places in the Bible, in Ezekiel 1. And there are cherubim in the garden. We see abundant vegetation and provision. There's lots to eat, there's lots growing. There are two special trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Adam was given a covenant. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and every living creature that moves on the ground." So here we have someone who is behaving like a king. He's a ruler, isn't he? Later on, we see that God says to him in the garden, "Work it and take care of it." Those two words in Hebrew, "work it" and "take care of it," come up 10 times as much in the later books about the priests. The priests are told to take care of and guard the law and the things of God. In the Garden of Eden, there are 4 rivers, so there's plenty of water. There's communion with God. After Adam and Eve sinned, God had to kill an animal. He says God clothed them with skins. That comes up later. It's almost like the Garden of Eden is a picture of all of the covenants. It's what God is working back to. And Mike told us that the covenant with Adam was universal. It's for everybody on earth. It's unilateral. It was God's initiative and his decision. And he wanted to bless people. That was his nature, was to bless, and he wanted to do that. It was unconditional at that point. God was just going to bless Adam and Eve. And it was an unchanging covenant for all people on earth at all time, that he wanted to bless them. When we get to Abraham, God goes down to one person. The Lord said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." And you see here again, God's heart to bless people. Love makes a way. So when we get to the time of Moses, we get to Exodus 1. Verse 6, the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied and increased in numbers and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Here we see God's covenant that he made with Adam and Eve and with Noah beginning to be effective. They are increasing. The family of Abraham had grown into a nation. So God was going to make another covenant with them. Why would God want to make a covenant? Why did he want to connect with people? The first point is God wanted to be a father. Jeremiah 3:19 says, "I myself said, how gladly would I treat you like my children and give you a pleasant land, the most beautiful inheritance of any nation. I thought you would call me Father." This is what he wanted. God wanted the people to love him. Deuteronomy 6:5, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. Just love me. I want to be in a loving relationship with you, as it was in the Garden of Eden." God wanted to live with the people. I will put my dwelling place among you, and I will not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I am the Lord your God, who took you out of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and walk with heads held high. He wanted to live among them. That is an amazing thing. He didn't want to just stay somewhere in heaven. He wanted to come and live with them, among them, like it had been in Eden. The people to obey him so that they would be blessed and living with him. And that comes in so many places because it's part of the basic covenant of God with Adam. He wants to bless people. He wants to bless the whole world. It was God's initiative. It was universal, the covenant with Moses. It focused through one people group, but it was for everybody, as I'll show you in just a minute. It was unilateral in that it was God's to make that covenant with Moses, with the people of Israel. But there was a response required. Like with Abraham, there was a response required. It was not unconditional, though. If you obey me fully, he says. But here's the heart of God. This comes from Hosea chapter 11. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals, and they burnt incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. To them I was like the one who lifts a little child to the cheek, and I bent down to feed them. So this is what our God is like. This is what Moses' God was like. One of the things I want to show you today is that the God of the Old Testament is not different from the God of the New Testament God. He has such a heart to bless and to reach down and to do what is necessary. Love makes a way. So the covenant with Moses is also unchanging in one way anyway, that Israel will always be his people. He promises that in Old and New Testament. So what is a covenant? A covenant is agreement between two parties. In those days, they talked about cutting a covenant rather than making a covenant. With Abraham, although Richard didn't focus on it too much last week. Do you know the story in Genesis 17 where the animals are put each side and the smoking firebrand goes up and down the animals? Here we've got dead animals. That comes back. Here we've got the presence of God, the fire, the flame doing something. Here we've got the seriousness of a covenant. If I break my side of it, I deserve to die. So what is the covenant with Israel? What is promised by God? What requirements are made? And what does agreement look like? At Mount Sinai, in chapter 19 of Exodus, on the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt. I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Covenant is made with the people after he has rescued them. That's important. The condition is full obedience. They will always be his treasured possession. He loves them so much, he'll do anything to keep them, anything he can do to keep them on side. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Do you remember what I talked about in the Garden of Eden? There was a king. There was a holiness. There was a priestliness about Adam and Eve. God requires of the people of Israel that they keep the Ten Commandments and the other laws, and that they have a system of sacrifices. This fits in with the other covenants. Obedience and sacrifice is the name of the game. And this is one of the details of the covenants. There's another one in Exodus 34, which talks a lot more about the Ten Commandments and the importance of that being the covenant. But here is one from Exodus 24. He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men and they offered burnt offerings. Sorry, could somebody else read that while I just have a drink, please?
He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Take half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read it to them. They responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words."
Thank you. There's dead animals again. There's blood. There's a book. That's interesting. And this comes from the New Testament. Now this is Hebrews 9. Now the first covenant had regulations. Ian, could you read it for me again?
Now the first covenant had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. A tabernacle was set up in the first room with a lamp to its consecrated bread. This was called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold-covered ark of the covenant. This ark contained a gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. Above the ark were the cherubim of the glory, overshadowing the atonement cover. But we cannot discuss these things in detail now. When everything had been arranged like this, the priest entered regularly into the outer room to carry on the ministry. But only the high priest entered the inner room, and that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins the people had committed in ignorance.
Thank you. So this is really where we're heading. Very important. We've got dead animals again, blood. We've got some things now that we see in the Garden of Eden as well. This was what the tabernacle might have looked like. Somebody tried to build one according to the specifications written in Exodus. So that's a visual aid for us. This is the outside of it. You've got the altar of sacrifice there. There's your dead animals. You've got water for washing. There were rivers, weren't there, in the Garden of Eden? And water comes up later, in the later covenants more as well. When we get onto the promise of the new covenant, you'll find water coming up. And also in the new covenant itself. And then you've got this big tent, and inside the tent, you've got visual representation of the Garden of Eden. There behind the curtain is the Holy of Holies, the presence of God. You've got cherubim there. And then because of the sin, inside the Ark of the Covenant, there was manna. God always provided for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. You've got the staff of Aaron. God made Adam a ruler. He made him able to take charge, and he blessed him. And like Aaron's rod, which enabled Aaron to have authority, so Adam and Eve together had authority. And the other thing, of course, in the Ark of the Covenant was the 10 Commandments. Absolutely important. So important. Is this a bit like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It says, do this, don't do that. It's God's decision what's right and wrong. And by obeying the 10 Commandments, the Israelites would show that they were respecting him, fearing him, loving him, treating him as a good father. If the covenant with Abraham was a bit like baby, where when you have a new baby, you just want to bless them, you want to give to them, you want to do things for them, and you want to help them, and all you want them to do is to respond to you in love. By the time a child gets a little bit older, you're saying, okay, this is how you behave at meal times. This is how you treat your auntie. This is what happens when you get given a present. You give them instructions because you want them to live harmoniously with other people. And the 10 Commandments and the other laws were for that, so that people could live harmoniously with each other. Just outside the curtain, you've got the altar of incense, and we have prayers that go up, and we communicate with God all the time. We have the bread of the presence there, and Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And God provided for his people in the Garden of Eden and outside of it for that matter too. There we have the candlestick, and the candlestick is decorated with flowers, and it reminds us of the flowers and the abundant vegetation in the Garden of Eden. We won't actually be talking about it during this series, but if you read God's pattern for the temple in Ezekiel, it's full of cherubim, it's full of flowers, it's full of vegetation, and it's just like the Garden of Eden. And this temple itself also reminds us of the Garden of Eden. On the curtain which separates the holy place from the most holy, you've got cherubim covering it as well. And on the other coverings, you've got cherubim woven into it. And we know that the Garden of Eden had cherubim guarding it so that people couldn't go in and take the tree of life and live forever in their fallen state. When everything was done according to God's instructions, the power of God, the glory of God, the presence of God came upon the tabernacle. In Exodus 25, God says, I want to come and live among you. In Exodus 40, when everything is made and Moses has been completely obedient, the power of God, the presence of God comes and fills the temple. I haven't got to the temple yet. Let's go back one. God's love is so great. He wants to live with us. He wants to live among us. He wants his influence to be through us to fill the whole earth with his kingdom. The tabernacle is a picture to the nations, a picture to Israel first, and the nation of Israel, as we read in Exodus 19, was to be a picture to the nations of the goodness of God and how he wants to bless the whole earth. Praise be to God. His love never fails. It finds a way to get around our sin. It finds a way so that his presence can come and dwell within us. Christ in me, the hope of glory. I don't want to go on because I shall take other people's fire from the talks that are coming up. But I do want us to remain with that thought that God's love never fails. He is the same God yesterday, today, and forever. The God of Moses and this covenant is the same God who made it happen that the Holy Spirit could come and live in us and we could be his ambassadors his kings, his priests, to the whole world. Amen.